I'm really delighted to be hosting this showcase, which is going to tell us lots about the Greater Manchester Civic University Agreement. Really interesting model, and I'm sure we're going to have some great insights and hopefully a really interesting discussion afterwards. We're going to hear a little bit about the progress that's been made since the agreement was signed in 2020, and we're also going to, I'm sure, hear something about the challenges, some of the lessons that the team have learned, and I know particularly here some of the work that's been done around citizen engagement. So I'm sure we're all really looking forward to that. I'm going to hand over in a minute to three colleagues who are going to take us through the presentation. So I'll hand over initially to Professor Richard Jones, who chairs the Civic University Board. And is also the Vice President for Regional Innovation and Civic Engagement at the University of Manchester. Richard is joined by Professor Jenny Hanley from the Royal Northern College of Music, Director of Programmes there and Vice Chair of the Board, and also Professor Sharon Handley from Manchester Metropolitan, who is the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Culture and Community. And then when we get to the panel at the end, we'll also be joined by Mags Bradbury, who is the Secretary to the Civic University Board and the Head of Social Responsibility and Civic Engagement at the University of Manchester. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping. I know this is all fairly familiar to us these days, but just to remind you, so we are recording this session. We know that for these showcases, there's always lots of interest after the event as well for those who can't join on the day. So we'll be recording it and making that available. It'll be on the CUN website within the next day or two. You'll see at the bottom of the screen the familiar Q&A function. If you do have questions, if you could please just drop them into the Q&A. I'll then host the Q&A after the initial presentation and pick up the questions. So questions, please drop them into the Q&A. Of course, we also have the chat function just next to it. And by all means, please do use the chat just for any general comments or connections to others who are in the session today. We've got up to an hour and a half or so set aside for this. We'll start with the presentations, and then we'll hopefully keep at least half an hour or so for questions at the end. So without further ado, let me hand over to Richard. Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk about our Greater Manchester Civic University Agreement. Just to set the scene, personally, I've been in Manchester for only 3 years, actually. I was at Sheffield beforehand. And it was actually when I was in my role as PVC for Research and Innovation at the University of Sheffield that I really started to understand the importance of universities for their communities. And I'm a physicist by training, but I got very interested in innovation policy, and so I've become very interested in the way that universities can contribute to their communities in all kinds of ways, both through innovation, economic impacts, but also through more general cultural impacts. So it's and I think collaboration is really important for that. So it's been a real pleasure for me to be at Greater Manchester, at the University of Manchester, to see this agreement develop. So you can have the next slide. So the Civic University Agreement is made up of 5 universities in Greater Manchester. We've got 5 very different institutions, different specializations and missions, different size, but I think they're all share this passion for what the universities can do for their community. So the Civic University Agreement is made up of it's those 5 universities: Royal Northern College, Manchester Met, University of Manchester, University of Salford, University of Bolton. Very important, though, that the Greater Manchester Combined Authority is absolutely tied into this agreement. And in fact, the signing of the agreement, it was sponsored by the Mayor, Andy Burnham, and I think having the authority of the Mayor and the backing of the Combined Authority, I think, is really important. So I just want to say something about the context in which we're operating and something about the way that the city region sees itself. So if I can have the next slide. I need to say something about how Greater Manchester works. Greater Manchester, I think, has been, one of the great strengths of Greater Manchester, and it's, as I say, a pleasure to come into it as a slight newcomer, is that it's had a very long-term view about how the city region should develop. It's a big city region. I'll tell you a little bit more about the scale of it in a moment, but I think the combined authority has worked very well. It's brought together a lot of independent evidence. So we've had a prosperity review, we've had work such as the Independent Inequalities Commission, we've got an economic vision, we've got health and social care devolution. So the context that we're operating in, I think, is very important. We've got Greater Manchester, I think, as I say, with a very strong view about how the 10 boroughs, and they are very different boroughs, and they're the challenges faced by Trafford are very different from the challenges faced by Rochdale. So there's differences. The different boroughs think about things in different ways. But I think it's been really commendable the way that the boroughs can come together. I think this has been an evolving process as devolution, civic devolution in the form that we see it has unfolded. Get big changes. The introduction of elected mayor, I think, changed the dynamics quite a lot. But the picture I want to give you is of a city region that does know where it wants to go or what it wants to do, and I think that's really quite important in terms of the civic universities finding their place in this agreement. So I can have the next slide. The point to make about Greater Manchester, the obvious point is it's big. It's a big city region, about 2.8 million people. It's got an economy that's bigger than Wales. So it's a substantial area of there's a lot going on here, and of course the higher education is very important. We've got more than 100,000 students. That's really important for the city. So the picture is of a very big and self-confident city region, but I think if we look underneath the skin, there are some big issues that we have to face. So if I can have the next slide, please. There are real challenges in Greater Manchester. So, perhaps some of you from the outside, Greater Manchester, I think, does a great job of projecting self-confidence. You see the growing city skyline and all the new building. So on the face of it, Greater Manchester is doing very well. But I think the reality is that the economy still isn't strong enough. And I think there's lots of evidence from economic geographers. Greater Manchester isn't alone in this, but the real feature of the UK is of a place which has a very strong global capital, London, and then the second tier cities really underperform. So Greater Manchester, actually, if we look at the GVA per head, its economic performance is actually lower than the UK average. And that's in common, that's in common with all the cities outside, all the major cities outside Greater London. So you could say the same thing about Birmingham and the West Midlands. You could say it about Leeds and West Yorkshire. You could certainly say it about Sheffield and South Yorkshire. So the economy isn't growing fast enough. And so that means that there's poverty, there's inequality. We've got big skills issues. We've got really very serious health inequalities. So just in the same way as health inequalities manifest themselves across the whole of the UK, with poorer health on average in the Midlands and North than you see in the Southeast. Within Greater Manchester, there are very profound health inequalities, up to 10 years in healthy life expectancy between our richest boroughs and our poorest ones. So I think universities are really going to be really important at the in dealing with these challenges. And I think having an understanding of where universities can contribute is really important. And so many of those features are places where the universities can contribute. We're really important for skills. Universities are the place where research and innovation happen, so where the building blocks for innovation. We're short of these health issues. The universities must have a real impact on health. So we see a city that's big, self-confident in some ways, but in other ways with many real problems that the universities are in a position to help address. If I can have the next slide. We've got other challenges, and I think that, you know, we've all come through a very difficult couple of years. You know, the pandemic was really you know, a hugely bruising experience for everybody. Of course, it didn't impact everybody in the same way. It exposed those inequalities that were already present. I think the pandemic's also worth mentioning. The pandemic was actually where the motivation for the Greater Manchester Civic University Agreement came from. It actually started with the vice chancellors of our 5 universities meeting really regularly, first of all to say, you know, to share notes about how we as institutions dealt with this terrible crisis, but then going on to say, well, okay, as we come out of the pandemic, how can we work together to address these broad challenges that we started to face? You know, the economic weakness of the UK in the last few years is really coming to head with the current inflation crisis, the energy crisis that we've had. All indicates that there are, you know, serious weaknesses, if you like, in the economic model that we've developed. And we see, of course, the changes that we're seeing due to the international context of Brexit, Ukraine, energy prices, moves to reshoring. It's a very, you know, it's been a very eventful few years, and it's a point at which unity of purpose is really important. So if I can go on to the next slide. Of course, there are things that you know, things aren't all grim, and one of the great things about this long period of the university of the city developing a strategy is it has been able to find those areas where Greater Manchester has strengths. Greater Manchester has a great digital economy. I think it's very fair to say that it's the second city for the second digital economy outside London. So there's a powerful digital economy developing. It does have a manufacturing sector. Manufacturing in all across the country has, of course, had a hard time, but manufacturing still remains very important for Greater Manchester, as it does for many of our cities. So that's something to build on. Health and life sciences everywhere, it's important everywhere, particularly interesting in Greater Manchester because of the opportunities that the devolution of the health and social care system offers. And kind of underpinning everything is this huge challenge of net zero. And, you know, I don't think that policymakers have really grasped the full significance of the transition to net zero, the economic wrench that will cause. So to summarize the context then, I think Greater Manchester is a city region that has developed a certain amount of political maturity. It's very big in scale. It has big challenges. These are nested in a very big, challenging national environment. But the universities are in a great position to support that. So those were the motivations. That was the context behind us signing the Civic University Agreement, as I say, brought together by the Mayor in 2021 for us to make this public commitment to work together on this, in this very challenging situation. So I'm going to turn now to Jenny Henley, who's the vice chair of the Civic University Board, to explain a little bit about how we've developed the agreement and how we've built a program of activities and a structure that can deliver things in the first instance. So if I can have the next slide and then hand over to Jenny.
Lovely. Thank you, Richard. Hi, nice to I can't see everybody, but it's nice to see everybody. So as Richard introduced me at the beginning, I'm Director of Programmes and Professor in Music Education at the Royal Northern College of Music. So my role involves looking after our degree programmes, looking after access and participation, student health and wellbeing, quite a broad portfolio, as is the nature with small institutions. So like Richard, I'm fairly new to Manchester. I started my role here in 2019 and then was thrown into the pandemic, and I moved to Manchester in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. And my involvement with the Civic University agreement, I came in May 2021 in the run-up to the development of the agreement and the agreement being signed. I took over from another colleague who was leaving the institution and moving on. And I'll explain what piqued my professional interest in the agreement in a moment, but personally, as an educationist, I've got a very keen interest in the relationship between educational structures, institutions, policy, and the socio-cultural landscape in which they're placed. And so this was a really interesting opportunity for me to firstly get to understand a city region that I was very new to and arrived here in an isolated situation in the middle of a pandemic. And just contextualise my work with the other HEIs, the other higher education institutions, and also the city region. So can I have the next slide, please? So the drivers for the Civic University Agreement, Richard's touched on a few of these already, and I just want to draw out the collaborative drivers and talk about our thematic approach briefly. So the idea of the collaboration came, as Richard explained, from the Vice-Chancellors and Principals meeting during the pandemic. And the idea that the Civic University Agreement was a mechanism for galvanising the institutions and bringing together our work runs very much through the approach and the agreement. Sharon's going to talk a little bit later about some of our successes and some of the successes in the collaborative work that we've done. But the way that we've tried to structure this is through taking a thematic approach. So the idea that rather than having a set of actions that we would initiate at board level and filter down through the institutions, we've taken themes, and what that has enabled colleagues across the 5 institutions to do is really place their work within those themes, and it's provided a mechanism to not only sort of develop new collaborative work, but to really make visible the work that we're all doing. And we've had some successes, and for example, one of those successes is very much in the creative and cultural work that the institutions are doing. So it's really important part of Greater Manchester that it's got this great creative cultural. Musically, Manchester is iconic, and lots of work going on in that area in institutions. And we've had a group of colleagues working in creative areas coming together and really using the Civic University Agreement to drive their work. So that's absolutely great. So if I can have the next slide, please, I'll just explain a little bit about our themes and where they came from. So we started with a survey of 1,000 Greater Manchester residents. So this survey was carried out sort of early 2001. And this is what piqued my professional interest, actually. So in March 2021, each institution had their own results, and this was centered around our executive. And so I saw our own institutional results, and I was really fascinated by the survey. And if you look at the responses on the screen there, you can see that they resonate very much with the context that Richard's laid out. So these real priorities related to the social and the economic growth of the city region. If we go on to the next slide, you can see a little bit more about the Manchester confidence that Richard was talking about there. So I found this really fascinating. This was very striking, that it was really clear from the survey that Greater Manchester citizens had quite a lot of pride in the institutions. They were very proud of the fact that we've got these really great 5 fantastic, very different higher education institutions. But if we look at the next slide, there's quite a lot of work to do. And actually the key column is hidden underneath my thing there, so I'm going to move that. So even though there's this great pride in the institutions, the survey showed that we've got quite a lot of work to do in engaging the citizens in our work. So you can see there 59% of respondents in that survey stated that they've never visited one of the institutions. However, if we dig a little bit more deeply, if we can have the next slide, you can see the sorts of things that people were saying about our contribution, what the universities bring to Greater Manchester. And it's really interesting on the left-hand side of the screen there, the sort of the higher responses are very much, again, around employment and jobs, again, really resonating with the context that Richard laid out there. There's something very interesting that the third highest response there is about bringing in students from other countries into Greater Manchester. I think that's really interesting. And then we move through the sort of various different economic benefits that they see. Access to cultural venues is bang in the middle. So again, that really aligns with this understanding and idea of Greater Manchester being this real creative and cultural hub. And then as it moves over to the right-hand slide, you can see the sort of more concrete benefits, I guess, sort of students volunteering and the universities paying taxes, but still, you know, a fairly decent sort of level of response there. So it was these kind of responses that helped us to develop our themes, and the themes emerged through this survey. If I can go on to the next slide. So these are our 6 themes, and hopefully just looking at those, you can see how they are in line with the things on those slides, and also the specific context of Greater Manchester. So what we've done with the agreement is underneath each theme, we have a set of commitments, and it's the commitments that form the agreement. So, for example, if I give you an example, under the commitment that we've made under education and skills, I'm going to read this out just to make sure I get it correct, is to help make our region the best area in the country for young people to grow up, and for children and adults at all ages and all levels of qualification to be supported to learn throughout their lifetime. So that's the commitment we've made. And of course, that's huge. That's an incredibly huge commitment. But we've outlined then some ways that we're going to do this. So such as we'll contribute to addressing the education and skills gap between Greater Manchester and the rest of the UK, and also between the most and least advantaged parts of Greater Manchester. We'll engage with learners from underrepresented populations through individual and shared access and outreach initiatives, build on collaboration with further education colleges. And again, this is something that Sharon's going to speak about. We've had some successes here. Collaborations with businesses, local skills improvement plan, and then committing to work with local employers. So again, very, very big commitments, but this is the approach that we're taking, that each of these commitments can then be divided down into really concrete actionable activities. So if I move on to the next slide, really crucially, what the themes have enabled us to do is link very much into Greater Manchester strategies. So we're making sure that the work that we're doing is in synergy with the city region strategies. so, for example, at our last board meeting, we had a presentation on the Greater Manchester Race Equality Review, and we were able to reflect on that and really think about how we can strategically align our work with the outcomes of the review. And a real clear priority for us is about engaging across the city region with young people in schools and colleges, and really thinking about where the sort of perhaps cold spots of engagement are, and directing our work there. So I'm going to hand over to Sharon now to talk a little bit about the sort of the implementation and some successes.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Hello, everybody. Unlike Jenny and Richard, I've been here for a long time at Manchester Met, since it was a polytechnic, actually, in various roles, but those roles really come together. And the one thing that unites those roles is I've always been civically engaged. So I've been a Dean of Arts and Humanities faculty, a faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And in a previous life, I was director of the consortium, Northwest Consortium for Routes into Languages, which was all about 11 universities working in partnership with schools and colleges across the region to promote languages. So working with schools and colleges and working with communities and cultural organisations in the, given that we've got a School of Art, has prepared the ground well for the work that we're doing with the Civic University Board. So next slide, please. So the first priority was to develop a collaborative governance structure. And it was really important to us that all parties had a voice. So we co-created that governance structure, and we established the Civic University Board. You can see that the Vice Chancellor Principals Group meets weekly, so that gives the strategic direction, and then we've created the Greater Manchester Civic University Board, and that is made up of 2 members from each organisation, an academic lead and a professional services lead, and then the GMCA has an elected official and an officer on that board. And of course we have Mags, a professional services lead, who really pulls everything together and facilitates everything. The chair is currently Richard Jones from Manchester University, and that rotates every 2 years. And so that will rotate to Jenny Henley from Royal Northern College of Music in December of this year. So that gives you a sense of the framework and the structure within which we work. So you will see that also the representatives from each institution connect the Civic University Board into the various HEIs and into the GMCA, enabling two-way communication so that everybody's engaged. But we're also connected with some of the GMCA committees, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Education and Skills Advisory Panel and Innovation GM. And we'll discuss that in a moment. Next slide, please. So, I think we've gone too far. One slide back. One slide back. Yeah. There must be a slide missing. Let me just talk a little bit. We started with that's the one. We started with a prioritization exercise linked to the GM priorities that Jenny and Richard have both spoken about. Through this exercise, as we've said, it's a huge task. So we decided to really focus our work around two themes in the first 2 years, around jobs and growth and education and skills, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. Now, in terms of jobs and growth, the Civic University Board has achieved progress with the Good Employment Charter. So all 5 universities now pay a real living wage. And we're working together to all be accredited under the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. So Manchester Met has already achieved that status. So we've already been through the process. And so we're now supporting the other universities with their submissions. So we've run a workshop, we've brought our HR teams together, and that's in a sense the spirit of collaboration that we have through the Civic University Board. So with a view to all of the universities achieving the Good Employment Charter. We've also utilised our Q-Step programmes. Manchester University and Manchester Met both have a Nuffield funded Q-Step centre for developing the quantitative methods skills of the students. So we employed some PhD students to map our staff and student data to identify good practice and challenges. And these students also produced a heat map around student attainment across the region, identifying areas where there's very low attainment, very low progression into HE, and that provides us with data to underpin our education and skills strategy. So if we go to the next slide, we, as we've said, one of the goals is to address the education and skills gaps, both within GM and between GM and the UK. And that, as Richard mentioned, there are some particularly disadvantaged parts of GM where the attainment levels are really challenged. We also agreed within this Civic University agreement that we'd engage with learners from underrepresented groups. So that mapping exercise also identified underrepresented groups. White working class boys, for example, was one category, BAME pupils for some disciplines. So we've used that data to inform our approach. But as you can see, one of the biggest challenges is reaching out to all of the boroughs. And we were very clear from the start, we must reach out to all of the boroughs. It's a GM strategy. But that's a significant challenge on our own. So the key is to work in partnership. And one key partnership is the Greater Manchester Hire, which is a collaboration, a government-funded partnership of HEIs working together with FE colleges and the GMCA on raising attainment in schools and colleges, so that we've created hubs in each borough, an FE college working in partnership with us as a hub to connect with the schools in each of the boroughs. And the value that the Civic University Board brought to this was that our heat map exercise threw up some areas where no university was connecting with schools, and that had been missed. And so working with GM Hire, we shared the data, and GM Hire have amended the schools that they're working with to ensure that we do reach out to some communities that felt they were not getting the support. So I chair GM Hire, which creates a direct connection with Civic University Board, and we've aligned the APPs of each of the higher education institutions, which means that even if when the funding runs out for GM Hire, we have coordinated and synchronized the activities. We've also built those relationships with FE colleges, which were quite challenged at some points for various reasons. But by co-creating the strategy with the college principals, we have developed something which works for them. And that was really important. And for example, one of the things that they've told us is that a significant blocker to achievement is maths GCSE. And English GCSE. So we have worked together to develop a pilot for maths buddies to work with pupils out in the schools and colleges. And then we have agreement through the Civic University Board that we will then develop that model and share that across all of the HEI. So we have a significant resource working in partnership with FE colleges to address this challenge and hopefully help to improve the attainment across the region. The other committee, if you like, group, advisory group, is the GM Education and Skills Advisory Panel. So this involves representatives from the FE colleges, from the Skills and Advisory Panel. It involves the people from all across the region, and the leader of the City Council chairs that group. So again, it's an important bringing together of lots of different departments across GM working in partnership with HEIs. And emerging from that, we have now developed a GM retention strategy group chaired by Deloitte, which brings together the HEIs, and we are developing a strategy to retain talent across GM, working in partnership with businesses so that they advise us on how to improve the skills of our students, but also it opens up the opportunities for the students. So those are just examples of how such a big challenge requires working in partnership and working through networks. Next slide, please. So the other key area that we're working on, is there a slide before this one? Innovation Greater Manchester. If we go back one slide. Right, maybe the order's changed slightly. I can talk to that slide and then I'll hand over to Richard to talk about Innovation GM. That's the one. So Innovation GM is a triple helix partnership involving public sector, private sector and academia. And Richard is very closely involved with this and is going to talk to this slide. Richard.
Yep. So thank you. So yes, Innovation in Greater Manchester is, if you like, a parallel development that's happened in the last couple of years. So a couple of years ago, it's been brought together really to be led by the private sector, but to bring together the private sector, the combined authority and the local authorities and the universities to drive the innovation economy of Greater Manchester. And I think the role of the universities here is twofold. I think, firstly, the universities are actually the places where most of the public sector R&D gets done. So as Innovation Greater Manchester can develop its priorities, it can support universities in the actual research that they're doing. We've had a fairly significant funding allocation through the so-called Innovation Accelerator programme that was introduced in the Levelling Up White Paper. But I think more generally, Innovation Greater Manchester and its combination with the Civic University Agreement gives us a great platform to develop collaborative research proposals. So I think it's become pretty much second nature that when we have a kind of a research proposal with a strong basis of place in it, then we can use the Civic University Board as a way of getting relevant contributions from all the institutions that can contribute. So I think that's one role of the universities. I think the second one is in the relationship between skills and innovation. We've talked a lot, I mean, clearly universities have a very important role in developing skills. And I think what we see as a bit of a weakness in central government is that there's not really a lot of join up in central government between innovation policy and skills policy. I think that's a problem, and it's a problem that we can address at a local level. So roughly speaking, if we've got a strategy for how we think innovation is going to change the economy for Greater Manchester, we'd like to be able to create a skill system that will support the high productivity, high innovation economy that we aspire to get, rather than, if you like, the economy that we already have. So a Civic University Agreement has been a fantastic parallel development that we've been able to have a way in where the universities can speak in one voice. And of course, I think the role of FE colleges here is crucial too. And I think the increasing dialogue that we see between the universities and the FE colleges, mediated by the combined authority, is hugely important. So I'll hand if I can hand back to Sharon for the next bit and the next slide.
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me now? So as Richard mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, one of the grand challenges is improving productivity, growing the economy. And in Greater Manchester, 99% of businesses are SMEs, and there is a particular challenge around helping and supporting them, because very often they don't have budgets for training or capacity to release people for training. So the universities, the business schools of the 4 universities have worked together with the GMCA to create a set of free online training materials to support SMEs. So these training materials have been developed, co-created in response to the needs of the businesses, and they are around management, around digital processes, finance and marketing. And this has also, it's given support to the SMEs, but it's also created a network and gives the SMEs a voice. And it's something that will obviously be developed further, but it's another example of working together and supporting the local region. Next slide, please. So one goal is to become carbon neutral by 2038, which is quite ambitious. And so a new GM Energy Innovation Agency has been created to support that goal. So by working in partnership with the universities, the agency deploys the research to create solutions for some of the big challenges. So we share that research. So in partnership, the Energy Innovation Agency helps businesses to bridge the energy innovation gap by validating, exploiting and scaling up low carbon energy innovations to enable rapid commercialization. So in other words, it's another example of how by sharing good practice and working together, we can pull together our collective strengths and achieve so much more for the region. Next slide, please. And my last slide, although this was not one of the 4 key themes articulated by Richard, culture is so important to Manchester as a city and to the region. And so culture is omnipresent. So I wanted to just include this slide with some examples again of how the Civic University Board is supporting this. So the University of Manchester, Manchester Met and the Manchester City Council wrote a bid to become a UNESCO City of Literature, which we achieved. And but what's interesting about the model is the way that we reach out to all of the boroughs through the public library network, running events, giving access to to families, to authors, to poetry readings, and supporting literacy. And actually the UNESCO ambassador visited us last week and was very impressed with the way we connect with communities, and we have driven forward sort of equality and diversity so that our literature festivals are not the white middle class constituencies. We have proactively reached out into communities that wouldn't normally engage with literature. And we sit on the Oxford Road corridor, where we've got the Whitworth Art Gallery, Manchester Museum, Manchester Poetry Library, and the Royal Northern College of Music. And together, we are addressing that challenge identified by Jenny of citizens and communities not accessing universities. So we open our cultural activities, our events, and we reach out to communities, and that includes the NHS and local hospitals, where we've run events for patients, we've run events with charities to support some of the staff in the hospitals, and recently we ran an event around the Windrush generation and the contribution that they've made, all through culture and through poetry. And so we've contributed to the GM Creative Health Strategy, which is using health in a range of contexts to support mental well-being and physical health. So culture is a commercial success, but it also underpins health and education across GM, with the HEIs playing a really significant role in fostering innovation and the convening power. So these are just illustrations of how the convening power of the Civic University Board is driving forward key agendas across GM. And I'm now handing back to Jenny to discuss how we work with a citizens panel to co-create our strategy, ensuring that we hear their voice. Okay, Jenny, over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Sharon. So you might well be sitting there thinking, well, this is great. These are some really great, massive, ambitious aims. What have they got to do with the people, and how are you going to ensure that the person who lives down the road is engaged with this? This is one of the really exciting things for me about the work that we're doing. And we've created a citizens panel. So I explained earlier how the themes were drawn out of that survey of citizens that was carried out. And that was a really important part of the setup of the agreement. And it's really important to us that we can take that through and we can make sure that we're continuing to be relevant and really being steered by what the citizens of Greater Manchester want and need, and that we're continually listening to them and their perceptions. So the purpose of the panel is to make sure that we're absolutely rooted in that local need. And the panel advises us on what our priorities should be. If I can go on to the next slide. So how it works. So what we've done is we've recruited 60 residents from Greater Manchester, and they're a complete cross-section of all of the different sort of demographic diversities across Greater Manchester. So we have our panel, and so they've been purposely recruited to represent those differences. The panel are paid, and that's really important. It's really important to recognise their time, but also their lived experience. And we launched it in November 2022. We had a fantastic day where the panel came in. It was the first time they'd met each other as well, so it was really exciting. And this is where Mags's experience really comes to the fore with the work of the Civic University Board as well. She really brings a wealth of experience of public engagement, and she's helped to define the Civic University Citizens Panel by the first thing that we did was create a charter, a working charter, how we're going to work together. And there was a series of activities that we did with the Citizens Panel to really draw out what their priorities were, and they were very skillfully put together to create a charter. And what we do is we meet regularly with them, and it's such an interesting experience, because quite often we're sat on our hands, because what we do is we sit and listen. So we have an external facilitator who sets up and curates all of the activities, and we sit in the room. Sometimes they're live, sometimes they're on Zoom, and we just sit and listen. And it's really interesting to me to hear that a lot of the things they're asking for and saying really kind of are in line with the things that we're wanting to do. And actually, quite often they're asking for things and we're sitting there thinking, but we're already doing those. But that's so important for us to hear, because we, as a board, we have to be reflective. That's really important, but we also have to be reflexive, and we have to think about our positionality in our work. And it's obvious to us what we're doing, but then perhaps what we're being told is we're not communicating that well enough, or there's work to do in certain areas. So an example of this is the panel told us universities don't communicate what they're doing. They need to share what they're doing and make it more accessible. So what we've done is we've really thought about that and thought, okay, so why are we not doing that? how can we make it better? So we're looking at our operating model, and we're in the process of recruiting an engagement and communications lead to help with that. They've told us they want the universities to be working in schools, and this links in with what Sharon mentioned about the Maths Buddy scheme, and so we're able to communicate that work. And we're also they told us that they are really interested in the different pathways that young people can take in and out of higher education, and so we're working to develop pathways, and we're trying different ways of communicating with the residents, and these were things again that came from the panel, such as advertising on buses and working with the Manchester Evening News, the local media, to talk about the work of the universities. A really key part of this is, because we meet regularly with the panel, it's interesting to see how the panel are growing and how they're working together and working with each other. That's really fascinating. But we're able to report back. So we're able to go back and say, okay, you told us this last time, and this is the work that we've done. And that's embedded in that working charter. So what the Citizens Panel is enabling us to do is prioritise our work, keep us grounded, and enable that kind of movement from the really broad, grand aims and ambitions right down to the absolute grassroots level at things that we can really do to support what different people in the different boroughs need and want. So I'm going to hand back over to Richard now, I believe.
Yeah, great. Well, that kind of, I think, sums up from our perspective. We're a couple of years in. I think we're very pleased that we've done a lot of stuff. I think there's some there's lots that we're proud of. There are problems. We're very different organisations. And each of our organisations is itself quite a difficult, quite a difficult thing to manage. I mean, everybody knows universities are not very easily managed places. So I would see our role. It's very difficult, of course, to be very directive in a university. It's the question of encouraging and nurturing initiatives when they appear, supporting people when they want to work across the institutions. So I think we've made some very specific specific goals. I think we've been quite focused, so there are lots of things that we haven't tried to do. We've been I think a strength has been that we've developed a strong working relationship between the key people in the 5 universities. We've got very good support from our combined authority, and our meetings. We always have a representative from the combined authority. So we've developed that kind of strong working relationship. I think the thing that we need to do carefully and cautiously now is slightly broaden our range of partnerships. I think a key one here is the FE colleges. I mean, I think it's very clear to all of us that work in this kind of post-16 skills sector that FE colleges are both crucial and highly neglected, and they have difficulties. But particularly as we work in areas like Rochdale, there's areas where we do have cold spots. It's the FE colleges that have a really big role. So I think that's going to be a big focus for our future activity. So I think, we're pretty proud of what we've done in the first 2 years. I think we're conscious of the scale of the task that faces us. We're conscious of the problems of trying to get our very different, very diverse range of organisations pointing in the same direction. And, you know, I really look forward to the discussion. I really be very interested to hear how other people's experiences resonate with what we've managed to do. So with that, I'll say thank you, and back to the other Richard.
Thanks so much, and huge thanks to all of you. I said at the beginning I thought this was going to be a really interesting presentation, and I think you've absolutely lived up to that. So much there in terms of ways of thinking about civic engagement, using evidence, engaging with citizens, loads of stuff, and I can see loads of questions coming in. So we're not going to be short of things to pick up. I'm just going to let me just pick up a few. Thanks also for the comments which are going into the chat as well. Also some interesting points there. I'm going to pick up and join up a couple of the questions, but one of the points that a couple of people have made, I think particularly Sarah Rees and Trevor McFarlane, there's a point about Sarah says, how do you know if you're making a difference? How will you know you're making a difference? And I think Trevor's picked up a similar point. How are you using research capacity to collect and make sense of impact? So just, I'm going to leave you to decide who's going to answer, but just let's say a little bit more about impact and impact measurement.
Yeah, so Mags, are you able to say something about that?
Yeah, actually the impact one is one that we are exploring at the moment, because obviously the survey, having done the survey at the very start, we have a benchmark on kind of the civic engagement, civic perspective. So we are going to continue to keep going with that and rerun that survey. But that doesn't really tell us the whole story. So one of the things we are looking to do is to do a review. It's probably too early to do a review. We'll probably do a review at the end of next year to look at kind of what we've done, what we've achieved, what our strengths are. I think kind of we've been looking generally at kind of numbers, but it's really hard to put tangible numbers on what we're doing. So hence we've talked a lot about kind of programs and activities. But yeah, definitely rerunning the survey to see whether we've shifted the dial in terms of our civic engagement. But then, yeah, doing a kind of not quite an Ofsted style review, but an external review to give us kind of the next steps and the next way forward. But that will probably happen, as I say, at the end of next year. And we will, I noticed that someone saying about our academics, and we do have a considerable amount of academic expertise, and we've used them, everything from kind of looking at Manchester Metropolitan's people and places and cities approach, you know, and what we can do. So we will keep tapping into that. I think one of the things that I've been talking with the Civic Impact Accelerator is looking at good practice and looking where other people are doing this, because there's no easy answer. And if anyone has got some really great kind of tools that we could use, I think we'd be more than happy to kind of work with people and collaborate.
Yeah, thanks, Mag. Great plug there for the National Civic Impact Accelerator. For those of you not familiar with that, it's a Research England funded piece of work under the auspices of the CUN, and particularly draw attention to the emerging, to the Civic Impact Framework, which is there. And I think, you know, one of the things that we're going to see across a number of the universities engaged in the civic work over the next couple of years is people really trying to test out that framework and see how they can apply it locally. So yeah, thank you. Good question and interesting answer. I'm going to pick out, there's a couple of questions again which I'm going to join up. I think the first one around how many members are on the citizen panel you actually picked up in the slide just afterwards, which was 60. But I'm going to pick up the question to some extent linked with that around how important really is public perception as an indicator of civic impact. Obviously you've done quite a lot to work out what do the people of Greater Manchester think about the university. So just who'd like to pick that up?
Mags again.
Yeah, so, and it's probably Jenny will want to come in as well on this one. So I suppose I'd slightly question the element of perception, because I'm not sure it's just about perception. It's about perception and engagement. So Jenny highlighted the bit about how many people had visited. And I think universities are powerhouses of aspiration, really. you know, you look at kind of what they can do and what they can galvanize. So the more that we can get our GM citizens engaged with us and supporting us, and us engaging and supporting them, the more we'll kind of address some of the big city region-wide problems. You know, we know within education that we've got kind of this gap of aspiration, and universities are really well placed to help plug that. And that's been really one of the conversations with the Civic panel. They've been, although they're a very broad age group, they've been really passionate about our work with younger people, kind of pre-secondary school, to get that kind of element. So I don't think it's the only indicator, but I do think it should be an indicator within that of how are we serving our citizens of Greater Manchester? How are we kind of connecting? You know, are we moving away from our kind of just sitting within our own institutions and being irrelevant, or being seen to be irrelevant to those people around us? So it is kind of a real passion, I think, for the board. I mean, the board have attended every single Civic panel. The commitment for the Civic University board with the panel has been outstanding. And, you know, we've had really strong attendance from our Civic panelists, which has been really positive. And they have really challenged us. So for me, it's not a single way to deal with kind of civic engagement, but it's helped us.
Good. Sorry, Shani, on mute.
Yeah, I would just add to that one of the challenges from the citizens panel was that we are not engaged enough in schools in some of the boroughs. And actually, when we took that back, I took that back to GM Hire, and we realized that some of this, I'm not saying all of it, but some of it is about marketing and brand, because a lot of events and activities were taking place under GM Hire. And we've now got banners which say that GM Hire is made up of the 5 universities working in partnership with FE colleges, so that they can see that actually universities are there working in teams, working with the local colleges. So as Mag said, there's not one solution, but we just got to keep on with it.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to a slightly different focus. There's a question from Debbie Squire around the governance challenges of working across multiple organisations and how you've approached the. Well, I'm going to stick a bit with the governance bit of it, because I'd really like to join this in with a question around the tendency for competitive behaviours. So you've done a really interesting job, I think, in bringing together the 5 HEIs, but you're also bringing together through the higher grouping, the FE colleges. Now, most of us would anticipate you're going to have a few tensions and a few areas of competitiveness in that group. So it'd be really interesting just to hear how that's played out. I'm sure you're not going to say that there were no tensions. So kind of just interested in how that's played out. What's been key to dealing with that? I'm sure there'll be interesting lessons for others.
Yeah, can I kick off on that? I mean, I think. Yeah, it's fascinating. You're absolutely right that there are those tensions, and I think it's really important to recognise them at the outset. You know, I can't even deny there might even be tiny little micro tensions between the 5 institutions themselves. I think, but the key thing is getting into a different mindset. It's getting out of a zero-sum mindset into what can we do to make the whole economy and skills system better. You know, I think. You know, in a sense, this is the kind of weakness of the weaknesses of the economy are, in a sense, a help here. If you can get a sense that people positively believe that what we can do is make a difference, to make the economy stronger, to make more demand for skilled people, to raise people's aspirations, then there will be benefits for all of us. You know, if the problems of parts of the conurbation, you know, we have very low HE participation rates. It's going to be good for all of us if we get more people with huge potential talent that's currently been wasted coming through to support us. Likewise with R&D, I bang on at great length about the kind of geographical imbalances of R&D funding across the whole of the UK. You know, the aspiration of Greater Manchester should be that all its institutions do more research than they currently do. I am totally comfortable about saying that that you know, it would be great for Greater Manchester, but it would be great for the country as a whole if Salford and MMU and Bolton and Royal Northern were, you know, had more research money to support the fantastic stuff that they're doing. So I think it's about getting out of zero sum thinking, thinking about how can we make this city region work better for everyone. I think that's the kind of spirit I'd like to think that we try to approach this in.
I would just add to that, on the FE front, at the beginning there were significant challenges because there was a perception that the universities, you know, are out to take their students, etc. And it was only by building trust and having conversations and then co-creating solutions so that the FE colleges could see that actually by working together, they get a lot more. They potentially get student ambassadors as a resource, and we're just stronger. And I think the big thing for me was when I said, well, how can we work together for the citizens of GM, as opposed to thinking about our individual institutions? And I think once we lifted it, a bit as Richard's mentioned with the research, lifted it out of institutional mindset into working for the region, we've now really got a very good relationship with FE colleges working together with us.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I wonder if, sorry, Jay, I might just add a little bit to the question, but feel free to ignore it and answer the original one. But I'm interested in whether you see yet any indications that the wider relationships across your institutions are kind of building on some of this and changing, or is the collaboration still very much in the civic space?
Yeah, I think it's probably too early to say, actually. I mean, the example that I gave about the creative group, that's very interesting because that's come together. So these are all colleagues who are researching it in various different aspects. So whether it's music or literature or art, etc., who have come together. So that's been very interesting to see. And that, you know, we absolutely have the idea that the agreement is for everyone. It's not just held by the board. It's not just us. And having that approach has kind of enabled these sort of partnerships and collaborations to emerge. I think there's a couple of things that I was going to say actually in response. I think one of them is going right back to the beginning and thinking about where this came from, and our vice chancellors and principals getting together as a result of having to respond to a crisis situation, and that naturally kind of removed that competitive edge, I think, because we had to work together. There was no other way of moving forward in the pandemic if we were not working together. That was really important, and that's very strong, I think. Yeah, I spoke before about not having stuff coming down from the top, but actually I think that's really important, and that having been one of the drivers and the common purpose. Putting the citizens at the centre also helps to sort of remove those things that, as Sharon mentioned. But I just wanted to speak a little bit about some of the challenges of governance and speaking from the position of a small institution. So for us, we're tiny. We're a small specialist institution, and it's just me. Yeah, and my colleague, who is the other board member, is our director of finance. So, you know, it's very challenging because he will have to sit on audit committee, or we'll have to go to board of governors, and actually managing some of these big agendas as an institution on our own would be impossible. So the ability to draw on the expertise and the sort of, you know, the strength in numbers, if you like, of our partners is really important. But also then to sort of, we're actually very mobile because we're very small and we can do things very quickly. So there's things that we know that we can contribute. And I think one of the key things is we are 5 very different institutions. Trust is important. We know where our strengths lie. I'm really looking forward to taking over as chair because I've got a slightly different position, and because because we are a single subject institution, it's going to really enable me to think very widely about the work. So I'm not sure that particularly answers the question, but it does highlight some of the specific challenges.
I think, Jenny, you're absolutely right. And we kept the governance structure quite simple. We haven't kind of gone for lots of subcommittees, you know, huge amounts of wealth of meetings. We've kept it really streamlined. And that's partly to kind of deal with the fact that we've got organisations that are very different and have got different capacities, but also so we can do things in between. And I think one of the things that sort of 2 years in, we know that we can tap into more of is our colleagues across each of the organisations. And it's one of the reasons that we're going out and going to employ a communication engagement person, because we had, for example, we had our HR colleagues, workforce colleagues come together, led by Manchester Metropolitan, looking at Good Employment Charter. You could see from that conversation how we could kind of build different approaches, more collaborative. We've had conversations about both academic and professional services staff that work on equalities coming together. We're probably at our current capacity to facilitate that. And that's probably, for me, one of the really big challenges is I think the board can see the potential and see the possibilities, but at the moment we don't, perhaps there is no one person working for the Civic University board, and having somebody that can get more of our teams together, more of our academics together, like that's perhaps been done in the cultural institution and the cultural work, will really galvanise it. So it's for me, it's the challenge is seeing the possibilities, but not perhaps being able to run at the same pace as the ideas and the vision.
Yeah, let me, again, I'm going to try and join up one or two themes coming out through the questions, but just following on from that, there's a couple of questions around resource and incentives for this work. So there's a question 238. What's the resource and cost that's dedicated to delivering the civic agenda, and is there a cost benefit analysis? But there's also a question from Dimitri in Brussels, who, the first part of your question, Dimitri, is around how do you reward academic staff, and I guess potentially professional staff as well, for their engagement in this activity? So just, does anyone want to pick up that, really around the kind of resourcing and prioritisation incentives?
Yeah, perhaps I can do that. I mean, I think, yes, in practical terms, the cost so far has been met. You know, Mags has been doing it as a sideline for a proper job, as it were, a very big sideline, I might say, in the University of Manchester. And of course, all of us have been, you know, putting our own time into it. We haven't had any dedicated resource from any other outside agency, so this has been done, you know, just as a result of the commitment of the institutions to devote their own resources to it so far. I think you know, in terms of how do you incentivize staff, and I think there's two things to talk about here. And I think there's a kind of informal sense that people get, that people are valued for doing this kind of thing. And, you know, that's a question of leadership, and leadership comes from the top of institutions. And we've been lucky to have leaders who are prepared to say in public that this kind of thing is very important for them, and, you know, is a very important strategic priority for the institution, and thus that the people who pursue it are valued. Then there are kind of more formal ways in which we do that, and, you know, that's a matter for each institution's own internal processes. Certainly the University of Manchester, you know, we have, you know, in the annual kind of performance review of faculties, social responsibility and civic engagement is, you know, it has a spot on the agenda, and so faculties are held to account, or, you know, held up for praise, if you like, for the activities that they're doing in this area. And then this, you know, translates into individual levels about the, you know, this, we are seeing, I think, a real move for these kinds of activities to be reflected more in things like promotion criteria. So, you know, this is, it's culture change. It's not easy. It's a combination of, you know, the leadership and the values that are espoused from the top of organisations, and detailed work in how organisations work.
Can I just add something to that? Yeah, if you look at each of our institutions' strategic plan, you will see civic engagement, social responsibility of some form or other in that strategy. And the real key is embedding this into institutional strategy. So this is not a layover. It's not something that's placed on top of what we do. It's absolutely capturing the heart of what we're doing as institutions. And so thinking about, the question about how we incentivize, staff is causing me a little bit of cognitive dissonance, I guess, because I'm trying to think about, well, what does that mean? And certainly the work, what I'm able to do here, so I lead on strategy, I lead on education strategy and widening participation strategy. So I'm able to really align my work with the Civic University work. I sit on the GM Hire board also, so I can completely embody the work within the institution. Then of course it's my challenge as a leader to bring that through and bring everybody with me. But the real key to developing strategy is to take what you already have and align it with what you can see to take you where you want to go. And I think that we've all done that. Each of our institutions have all done that, and that's how we're able to to bring our colleagues along with us.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and I think that just stepping back a little bit from the Greater Manchester experience, looking at what's happened through the CUA development nationally over the last 2 or 3 years, that is in many ways the key for organisations. It's that sense of the civic agenda becomes more about how we do our business rather than an add-on agenda, and that kind of gets through a lot of those issues around kind of permission and recognition and so on. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to try and get through as many of the themes at least in the questions as I can. I am conscious there were quite a few questions around impact and measurement of impact. I know we haven't taken them all one by one, but I think we had a go at those at the beginning, and I do predict fairly confidently that through the autumn we will be coming back perhaps with some further webinar opportunities or discussion opportunities around impact across CUAs, because it's clearly an area that lots of us are going to be thinking about. But I'm just going to pick up this question from Richard Brabner from UPP Foundation. And it is around it's really around how the sort of breadth and depth of engagement with universities and perception of universities. And Richard, you're pulling out the evidence around how class and socioeconomic background influences that. So the question: how are you measuring engagement and participation from those with C2D backgrounds? Just and actually maybe just connect that potentially in with another question around the diversity and breadth of the citizen panel as well.
Yeah, do you want me to answer this one, because this really kind of plays to how we've set out the civic panel, because the question about the diversity of the civic panel, we have recruited on the diversity of Greater Manchester, and the question is kind of what do we mean by diversity, and we've taken this in a very broad sense, so that the panel has a ethnicity that reflects Greater Manchester, it has a gender that reflects Greater Manchester, it has a disability. We haven't looked at all the protected characteristics because we weren't able to at this point, but we have, one of the key things we looked at was around skills and knowledge and educational levels, and what we've done is recruit broadly. It's not 100% perfect, it's a really good match to the education skills within Greater Manchester, and that was really important to us because we didn't want to just be talking to those people that had an education experience at a higher education institution. We wanted to talk to people that perhaps had no engagement or a very different engagement or a limited engagement. So we have the opportunity within the civic panel, and we have done this in some of the smaller sessions, to kind of look at the panel and ask them questions based around their skills and their skills levels, and that's been really helpful. It was really helpful when we looked at what civic engagement meant to that group, but different just to show how far we actually need to go to engage with people that haven't engaged within higher education. So it is really important to us. The other thing within the mapping exercise that we did last summer was we heavily focused on disadvantaged groups and looking at different economic bases around economic areas. We can perhaps go to the super input level, but we have looked at kind of where the gaps are in our student engagement, as in where we're drawing from. The other question around the diversity was the diversity of our board. And I think that has been a constant question for our board. Gender-based, yes, it's broadly, the board changes as people change within the university. We've got broadly a balanced gender approach, but certainly the board is very aware that it perhaps doesn't have around ethnicity the balance that we would seek out. Yeah. We haven't done a full equality monitoring exercise on the boards, so I wouldn't want to speak about perhaps some of the unseen aspects of kind of diversity.
Right. I'm going to try and squeeze in one or possibly two more questions. I do want to pick up one I think really good question and a brief one from Debbie. How are students involved in all of this? Who wants to have a go at that one? Jenny, do you want to start?
Yeah, so this is quite exciting. So sort of like simultaneously to the development of the Civic University agreement and board, there's a Greater Manchester Students' Assembly being created. So this was a piece of work that started about 12 months ago. We had a discussion on the board about how we were going to involve students and thought about, we really wanted to make sure that it wasn't tokenistic, just having a student representative on the board. Sorry, my phone is going. I should have put it on silent. That we wanted to do it in a really meaningful way. And at that time, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority were thinking about how they were engaging with students. So there's a new role, a new person who's been put in place, and Sharon may wish to comment on this because they're based at Manchester Metropolitan University, who is specifically there to support the development of the Greater Manchester Students' Assembly. So I met with him, he's met with all of us, and so we're going to really work together, and that's very exciting, I think. So we can, again, what's really key here is that we're aligning things with lots of different networks and boards who have got different capacities to do different work, but our strategies are aligned, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. There's nothing much more to add to what you've said there, Jenny, other than the students themselves are very excited about that because they feel that they are playing a role across GM and they have a bigger voice, and so they also are now promoting the Civic University agenda, within student unions, and also the student unions from each of the institutions are working together, which is great. So that's one side. The other side is, of course, we do quite a lot of student-led activities, student-led engagement in some of the schools and colleges, the maths buddies, mental health buddies that we're developing at the moment, and a whole range of other student-led engagement underpinning key agendas.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to invite a very quick response to one last question, and I appreciate it's a question we could probably talk about at some length, but back up earlier in the questions, Trevor asked a second part of his question around the importance of devolution of powers to local places and ways in which that might impact. It feels as though the relationship with the combined authority has been really important. Just wonder, any quick reflections on devolution, the importance of devolution of powers, how might it change in future in terms of universities? Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting to be part of this journey that Manchester is taking. So I think the devolution of increasing devolution, particularly in areas like skills, health, and innovation, is really important. I mean, we need to be, I think the thing that can work well at a city region level is the integration across those different areas. I think that's something that's very difficult for central government to do. I think it's a way in which you can really add value. You know, I mentioned, you know, aligning the skills agenda and the innovation agenda. That, you know, the distance between the Department of Business and the Department for Education is, you know, it's a few hundred yards, but a giant trench in terms of actual communication. We can, you know, a well-running local devolved system can break down lots of those barriers. It gives us as universities a voice in that. It gives us the opportunity to hear from the other actors in the city region. So I think, you know, I'm a very strong enthusiast for devolution to city regions, and I hope we see more of it.
Well, look, I'm going to draw it to a close there. Can I just say huge thanks to our presenters, Sharon, Jenny, Richard, and Mags as panelists as well. I think really interesting session, things we could keep talking about, and things we undoubtedly will come back to in future webinars and discussions. I think it's you know, it's been a fascinating hour and a half. Can I also say many thanks to all of you who've been on the call. Great set of questions, interesting chat. I hope we've done justice to the questions that have been raised. If there's specific things that we've missed as we've gone through, then you know, we'll feel free to follow up and we'll pick them up. I'm sure most of you are here because you're already connected in with the Civic University network and the regular newsletter. If not, please do, and you'll find lots on the CUN website. And finally, just thanks as ever to the organisers for their very you know, good management of this, and for the setup at the beginning. So hope you've enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you at future events, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you all.